At the faces of the generals standing behind Donald Trump this morning, you don't see loyalty, you see fear. You see men who know they are witnessing a mistake that cannot be fixed with a tweet. Because what happened today wasn't just a diplomatic spat. It wasn't a trade dispute over milk or lumber. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because the next 96 hours are going to move fast. And drop a comment right now.
The moment no one expected is suddenly becoming unavoidable. After months of pressure, threats, and economic standoffs, the policy once presented as unshakable is now being quietly reconsidered. Reports suggest the administration of Donald Trump may be preparing to scale back metal tariffs on Canada, the very measures once described as essential to national strength. These are not minor policies. They were framed as proof of economic power. They were used as leverage against Ottawa, and now they're becoming increasingly difficult to defend. This is not just a routine adjustment. If confirmed, it signals a rare public reversal. Welcome back. Today we're examining a turning point in a major trade confrontation and why it may be reaching its conclusion. For months, tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum were presented as a winning strategy. Officials repeatedly insisted domestic industry would benefit and that foreign exporters would bear the cost. But new reporting from Financial Times indicates internal discussions about stepping away from those same measures as economic pressure builds and public support weakens. The shift did not happen overnight. Behind closed doors, analysts had warned that prolonged trade pressure would produce consequences at home. Now, those consequences appear to be arriving. The administration disputes the interpretation, calling the reports speculation. Yet officials simultaneously describe the tariff strategy as flexible, a subtle acknowledgement that changes remain possible. And that raises the key question. If the policy was working, why reconsider it? The original justification was protection. The promise was stronger industry. The claim was that foreign countries would absorb the impact. But data began telling a different story. When tariffs increased sharply and expanded to consumer goods, costs inside the United States rose. Supply chains tightened. Businesses adjusted prices. Consumers felt the difference at checkout counters. Then independent research delivered a clearer picture. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that the overwhelming majority of tariff costs were paid domestically by firms importing materials and by households buying finished products. In simple terms, the economic pressure did not primarily land abroad. It circulated within the U.S. economy. Economists across political viewpoints reached similar conclusions. Tariffs acted less like external penalties and more like internal taxes, influencing investment decisions and slowing expansion plans. What began as a demonstration of strength gradually turned into a financial burden. Businesses reported shrinking margins. Manufacturers faced higher input prices. Consumers absorbed rising costs in everyday goods. And timing matters. With elections approaching and affordability becoming a central concern, economic perception carries political weight. Even small price increases can shift public sentiment. Despite this, officials publicly rejected the interpretation that Americans were paying the price. Yet market reactions, corporate earnings reports, and independent analysis continued pointing in the same direction. Which brings us back to the present moment. If a rollback happens, it will not simply be a policy tweak. It will mark the end of a strategy built on the belief that pressure abroad would produce relief at home. Instead, the evidence suggests the opposite occurred. Trade conflicts often begin with certainty, but they usually end with arithmetic. Numbers, not rhetoric, decide their outcome. And sometimes the most revealing signal in politics is not the policy that's announced, but the one that quietly disappears. He insisted the numbers were on his side. When asked directly whether Americans were paying the price, Donald Trump maintained that the country was gaining tremendously. The data said otherwise, but the message never changed. And that contradiction was about to face a new test. Within weeks, the legitimacy of several tariffs could land before the Supreme Court of the United States, a decision that could determine whether the policy itself was lawful. But even before any ruling, the political reality was shifting. As evidence accumulated, the administration did not pivot. It resisted. Economic reports were challenged. Business warnings were minimized. Rising consumer costs were denied. because admitting the policy failed would mean admitting the central promise behind it was wrong. So the stance hardened until the space to hold it disappeared. By this year, pressure moved from markets to politics. Prices climbed. Affordability concerns grew. Approval ratings slipped. Corporate leaders became openly critical. Lawmakers within the president's own party grew cautious. An approaching election cycle turned economics into urgency. Suddenly, the strategy created a dilemma: continue defending the policy and absorb political damage, or step back and acknowledge reality. Reports now suggest a retreat is being considered. But this shift did not occur in isolation. In Ottawa, Mark Carney followed a different playbook. Instead of escalating rhetoric, policymakers expanded trade partnerships, strengthened links with Europe and Asia, and reduced dependence on a single market. One side relied on pressure. The other built alternatives. One increased threats. The other increased options. And over time, leverage began to move. Even now, officials avoid describing the shift as a reversal. They call it flexibility. They call it clarification. They call it speculation. Yet in policy language, adjustments often signal outcomes already decided by events. The narrative was built around toughness, around winning trade conflicts through confrontation. But the sequence that followed told another story. Tariffs were imposed. Domestic costs rose. Support declined. The strategy weakened. And now it may be unwound. This moment matters because it reshapes perception. Trade disputes are not only economic battles. They are credibility tests. When a government frames pressure as strength, walking it back changes the message. Canada emerges with broader partnerships. The United States faces questions about strategy, not because of chance, but because assumptions met arithmetic. Experts were dismissed. Allies were strained. Leverage was overestimated. Resilience was underestimated. Each step narrowed the path forward. The potential rollback of metal tariffs signals more than a policy change. It marks the closing chapter of a confrontation defined by certainty and concluded by consequences. Pressure alone could not force the outcome. Adaptation did. In international economics, endurance often defeats escalation. And sometimes the most decisive victory belongs to the side that simply refuses to panic. If you value clear analysis over political theater, stay with us. Because in the end, policies don't succeed on slogans. They succeed on results. Thank you for watching.